it seems like everything that I do as far as my consulting projects and folks that call me up for advice and so forth, more and more what they have in common is some kind of collaboration, shared infrastructure, consortial arrangements of one sort or another. So that I want to kind of talk a little bit about my observations relative to those. I mean, so I think you're in good company, when it comes to that. I think you've probably learned by now that libraries really can do a lot more together than each one can do with its own independent resources. I think that's one of the huge trends that I see is away from one library, one automation system, 1,000 times over, but more and more shared infrastructure so that libraries can kind of be more effective together. So let me go through some slides that I have, and I would say, feel free to ask questions. My time is yours. I'm just as happy to respond to your questions and comments as to go through this short outline of things that I prepared. So there's a lot of reasons why libraries band together for cooperative technology in one way or another. The simple, what you think initially is, well, it's just cheaper to share an automation system than it is to run my own. And I think that's really true. I don't know about the economics of Kōtui. Each of you could say whether or not it's worked out to be less expensive than what you had before. But it's really offsetting a lot of costs. Not only the servers, the software that each library would have to buy otherwise, but especially the people. I mean, do you really want to focus kind of your best technology folks on babysitting a server, or have them really engage with kind of higher level patron-facing issues where they might be able to do more and more things to help your library have a better impact on your clientele? So, just the shared cost is just the beginning of it, is what I would say. Resource sharing, is a really important strategic driver, I think. Any given library, might have, depending on its size, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, or even 1 million volumes, if it's a large library to offer its patrons. But then once you get together, you can have many millions of volumes that are available to your patrons of much diverse type and so forth. And you can, then the trick is to getting those resources to patrons quickly and efficiently. So direct consortial borrowing is something that I see a lot of activity toward, in lots of different consortia. How do we set up the right kind of infrastructure to make it to make interlibrary loan look a lot more like circulation? A patron finds something in the catalog, they've got a hold on it, and it shows up in the library the next day. That's what we expect in a multi-branch system. I think increasingly that's what's expected in consortial implementations of an automation system. So a lot more material are available, and you can get it to the clients much faster. Once you have shared infrastructure, it also gives you a chance to focus your collections. Not every library can collect everything. So whether it's an academic library, they really kind of work on that collaborative collection development, but I think it applies to public libraries as well. You can have your area of focus and not worry about other areas of focus, but rely on your consortial partners. So I see that having a pretty big impact and having a stronger, broader collection by virtue of strengths in different libraries that are partnering together. And it also, this is kind of an optional thing. I think depending on the nature of the organization and what the preferences and organizations are, you could say, well, we could have a centralized technical processing department, get all of our materials processed centrally, shelf ready, or lots of different arrangements. Or we could have distributed technical services. We have catalogers in this library that are good at this kind of material. But once you have shared infrastructure, it opens up all those opportunities. So I've seen that in several different projects that I have worked with, where they're able to redeploy services to public services where they really have a lot more things to do and make better use of the technical services staff across the organization by centralizing services a bit. Sometimes it's kind of distributed across a few libraries, sometimes it's truly centralized. So, you start getting, lots of opportunities to do things differently once you share resources. So this is, what a typical kind of multi-branch library system would look like in a very simple picture. And, it's a shared bibliographic database. All of the branches share the same database. You can, typically you float items among the branches. I think that's getting more and more common in multi-branch kind of systems. But it's isolated within that independent, library service. So that I think is pretty common. And when you look at most ILS or LMS, whichever is a proper way to say it here, implementations, that they used to look a lot like that. Now, the tricky part gets when you want to, bring a bunch of libraries together that already have, their own automation systems, and they want to be able to share resources. So how do you make interlibrary loan or direct consortial borrowing operate more like circulation when you have a bunch of separate automation systems? It takes a lot of hoops to jump through, a lot of technical infrastructure. So this is an example that would use something like VDX, which is part of the Tapuna, I think, arrangement that is here in New Zealand. Might not be implemented this way. This is more how it would be implemented within a consortia. But it's really, I think this illustrates the complexity of doing resource sharing in the absence of shared infrastructure, where you have to be able to, move transactions among separate integrated library systems that weren't really designed to talk to each other, using protocols like INSEP that are very fragile and sometimes work with some systems better than they work with others, and so forth. And then, different kinds of standards like ISO ILL, the 1060, 1061 protocol to be able to move a transaction to another library loan system if it's not available within the consortium. So, don't worry about the details here, but just the gist of it is that it can be a pretty complex arrangement to do resource sharing in the context of a lot of separate automation systems. And so that's what's great about a implementation like Kōtui, where you have many libraries sharing the same infrastructure. It makes it look a lot like that single library multi-branch arrangement with the same kind of elegance for resource sharing and consortial borrowing. And instead of being one branch to another, it's one library to another. This, I think, is a lot more sustainable than the other, especially as the number of participating libraries gets large. The other thing I want to talk about is how large you can get. So in my database, and LibWebCats as part of Library Technology Guides, I think I have most of the public libraries in New Zealand. I might be missing one or two, but by my count, there are something like 69 library services spanning 324 facilities altogether. Let me know if I'm missing any, or if I still have some that might not be there now. But I spent a lot of time kind of keeping up this database of libraries so that I have a good handle on what's happening with automation systems, which is kind of what I do day in and day out. When I think about the automation systems that are represented in the public libraries in New Zealand, this is kind of what I see. The only thing to notice here is that in my database I still code Symphony as unicorn. And it's, that's what the system used to be, and it evolves. And in order to get, when I track the history of automation, it's kind of hard to account for the name change. So in all the, on most displays that you see in the database, it automatically translates unicorn into Symphony, but it's coded as unicorn, and that's what it shows up in this chart as well. But you can see kind of a diversity of automation systems used throughout New Zealand, with Symphony being kind of the strongest one now. And so, since that's what Kōtui is based on, you'll expect to see probably continued growth of that as well, and possibly at the expense of some of the others. So despite cooperative projects like Kōtui, it's still a fairly fragmented scene nationwide, I would say, as far as how library automation is implemented nationwide. And a lot of systems that we see in the U.S., Symphony, Millennium, Koha, Horizon, Carl, and then some that are more specific to this area. Spidus is used only somewhat in the U.S., more in the UK, Canada. NCS and ELM we don't see in the U.S. hardly at all. So one of the things that is happening worldwide, I think, is the consolidation of libraries into a fewer number of automation implementations. So Kōtui is given, about that, and even within New Zealand, you can see the consolidation within the urban libraries surrounding Auckland into a single system. Just mention that's kind of consistent with the way of the world. They use Millennium, I understand, so they've kind of migrated some of their surrounding communities into their own system. This is what I want to point out. I wrote an article about it recently. So Illinois Heartland Library Consortia, it's most of the lower half of this state in the U.S. So before, in this state of Illinois, they had several different consortia. There was a group of 4 of them here that were previously kind of regional consortia, each operating their own library management system. And there was another set of 5 that also, was in kind of the upper part of the state. They consolidated organizationally, but they still have their separate automation systems. But this one I point out because you have 5 already large consortia that merge organizationally and now are merging their automation systems. So this, as far as I know, is the largest consortia in the U.S. And it has, you can read the small print, 585 member libraries served by that. So, then they're going to be implementing with an automation system called Polaris, which isn't available in Australia and New Zealand. But these days, I don't even think that, if you're in this top tier of library management systems, they can all handle that many libraries by now. The scale of technology is pretty much infinite. When you think of Google as one kind of worldwide computer made up of, tens of thousands of commodity computers clustered together, you can do the same thing in a library management environment. When you think of OCLC's ambitions to bring all the libraries in the world together, the limits are no longer the technology. The limits are things like, to what degree are libraries willing to cooperate, compromise on policies, all these different kinds of organizational things that are the real limits of cooperation these days. So I point this one out to say that, almost 600 libraries is a lot of libraries to share one system, but it's entirely plausible these days. Now, I expect this to be a very successful implementation. They'll be starting that. They're starting it now. I think they'll come into production either late this year or early next. But the trend is larger and larger, and I point this one out because it's the largest one in the U.S. that I'm aware of. And the next one I want to mention, I've been following as well. This is a group of academic libraries. So just to show that it happens across all library types. So the Orbis Cascade Alliance has an incredibly interesting history. It spans 3 states in the U.S. up on the upper northwest, Washington, Oregon, and some in Idaho. 37 academic libraries. It started off as 2 separate consortia. The Orbis Consortia and Cascade, one in Washington, Oregon, I think is how it was divided up. Those consortia began in about the early 90s, I think, with a mandate to try to start sharing resources in better ways amongst themselves. And they started off using their innovative sites. They had this InReach consortial borrowing system that looks a lot like what I showed you in that complicated slide. So they each had one of those. In 2003, they decided to merge. The two academic consortia came together and merged their InReach system to have one of those complicated direct consortial borrowing resource sharing environments. That went fine until 2008. For various reasons, they decided they want to keep the same general configuration, but move from innovative resource sharing software to OCLCs. So they implemented Navigator, which is VDX, and WorldCat Local. But that was an interim step. Their current strategy, they've been working on for the last 2 years, is to take those 37 libraries and put them all under one integrated library system. So just a few weeks ago, they announced that they selected Alma for that. So the next year or so, they'll be migrating these 37 academic libraries all into a single shared infrastructure. And it's all based on an explicit strategy based on kind of pressing the bounds of deep collaboration. I spoke with John Helmer, who's the executive director of the Orvis Cascade Alliance, just a few days ago in support of an article I was writing. And he wanted to emphasize that this isn't just about direct consortial borrowing. This is about deep collaboration among institutions in every way that we can think possible. So, all the things that we talked about, especially in academic libraries, having different areas of strength is really important. You serve different populations, there are different areas of research. You want to collect in some areas and not collect in others, but depend on your partners. And their belief is that you really can't start doing that until you share infrastructure. And that rings true with me. I've seen lots of mostly academic libraries that have these informal relationships where they say they're going to do collaborative collection development, but it never really pans out because you don't have the tools to really assess collections and then to share the collections in effective ways. So their view is that we've got to have shared infrastructure if we want to be serious about shared collection development. I'll also mention another project in passing, which is the Too Cool initiative. I was a technology consultant for them, where they want to do collaborative collection development and other kinds of resource sharing. So you have two kind of major research institutions, Columbia and Cornell, that are going to implement a shared ILS. These are institutions that compete vigorously with each other, but their libraries want to cooperate with each other because it's in mutual interest. So, just another example of having to have the right technical infrastructure to support what you want to do collaboratively. So all the same kind of things we talked about. Collectively build collections, share technical processing. We have not enough catalogers. How do we get the most use out of them to be able to adequately describe our collections? Of course, the resource sharing, but all of that sounds really great, but also comes with challenges. How can the same automation system serve a small library of 1,000 students and the major university of, 40,000, 45,000 students? So the challenges are often organizational. How do you maintain local identity, local control, local policies, deal with governance boards, from all these different legally independent institutions and so forth. The same kind of challenges that I think apply in projects like Kōtui as well. But their view was that all the previous arrangements of technology impeded collaboration. These isolated silos of automation impede resource sharing, collection development, and all aspects of collaboration. So they really wanted to do something kind of much more aggressive as far as shared technology. So I would say that in the broader world where libraries have far too few resources in general, I don't know of any library that's ever said, well, we have more than enough resources, we're fine and happy. I don't think I've heard that since I've been dealing with libraries. So I think that really brings a mandate to do whatever it takes in cooperation to make the best use of those resources. And hardly ever is that one library, one automation system in isolation. How do you kind of bring libraries together with a foundation of technology that enables all these different threads of activity that help us work together? So better leverage of our collections. None of us have the resources to buy every book in the world, every electronic resource in the world. We want to free up resources that are otherwise spent in duplicative activities related to technology across the libraries so that we can focus on higher level activities for the benefit of our users. So just stronger together than independently, and kind of end on the thought that the shared automation, you might do it for some reasons, but it's just the beginning of all these other opportunities that you can take farther once you have kind of this shared infrastructure. Bring in more libraries and more activities, more services. The imagination, I guess, is the limit on which areas you want to focus on to take advantage of the shared infrastructure to make kind of the broader collaborative of an organization like Kōtui stronger and more effective for your patrons. So I think that's what I had prepared to say, and I hope we have time for some questions and conversation.
It is the morning, actually.
Somebody raise their hand. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Alison Dogan from Auckland Libraries.
Yeah.
In the New Zealand scene, given its scale, what would be the impact of every public library in New Zealand was on the same ILS? Where I'm coming from is like, is it important to maintain a situation of competition between vendors, or what happens when, for example, everybody in the state in the US is on the same ILS?
Well, I would say, it all depends, of course. In Scandinavia and other parts of Europe, I hear lots of conversations around national infrastructure. It's, and some of these are countries of much higher population as well. So I think that there's a lot of thinking about that very question. Is it reasonable to think that we could have national infrastructure, based on whatever, one vendor system, one collaboratively built system, some combination thereof? So it opens up kind of enormous possibilities for collaboration at a national scale, but then it also is kind of risky, isn't it, by having all of your eggs in the one vendor basket, and then what happens if something happens with that vendor? You don't have a bunch of local problems, you have a national problem. So I think that's why those efforts tend to take a long time of planning and so forth. But to me, it seems like New Zealand would easily be within the threshold of what you could consider having national infrastructure. It's not that big. It's smaller than a lot of consortia that exist in other regional areas. And, the issues are often things like internet connectivity. And I know New Zealand has a lot of resources applied to providing shared, internet connectivity throughout the community libraries all over. So you're already a pretty good step in that direction. As far as the national database, we've already got a National Union catalog through the shared Voyager system. So in a way, I would say that there's a lot of pieces kind of already moving in that direction. But it's a bold step to say that we're going to step away from all of our regional ILSs and do a national one.
So if I turn the question around, to what extent does competition drive quality improvement and innovation in the ILS, venue or market?
Well, so the competition is worldwide. So having one vendor in New Zealand, if anything, it kind of engenders the competition at a national level to be able to supply those kind of systems. So, you know.
One possible way around that, sorry, Sue Sutherland, one possible way around that is that you would make it known that you would be re-tendering every 5 years or
Something
6
like that.
years.
Yeah.
And, you know, a genuine intent that you would change it, you know. But if I could, I was going to ask another question.
Yeah.
We've talked about the shared sort of collections and the shared ability to you know, all of the things around that purchasing and so on. The kind of add-ons that libraries are wanting, if you like, you know, discovery layers that go across all of their collections, possibly, certainly in the New Zealand situation, much greater integration between the library automation and council systems.
Yes.
What experience have you, or what knowledge have you about what American libraries or other libraries consortia are doing with those kind of add-ons in the consortia environment?
So it varies, of course. The initial step is a shared discovery environment for the entire collective, right? That's fairly easy to do. But what if a subgroup within that wants a different kind of discovery experience or something like that? Well, that's technically possible, and I'm trying to think of examples, but I'm not thinking of one doesn't come to mind. But there's nothing about the way that discovery systems and library management systems interact that would preclude that. You know, you harvest the data and synchronize back to the ILS, and you would have to do it with a different scope for that group of users. So technically, I think that that would be possible. The second part about the kind of the enterprise question of how do you take your library management system and do things like exchange patron records with the council ERP system and those kind of things get to be trickier, but again within the realm of technical possibility. In the next generation of systems, there's such an emphasis on this API layer. So having systems that communicate through these open application programming interfaces that can be exercised in different ways. It would be perfectly reasonable for one council to set up the APIs to exchange their patron data relative to the collaborative one. So it's all possible, and I think that that's something that you see a lot more in Australia, New Zealand, the UK than you might see in the US, where the libraries really operate more independently as a business unit as well, and aren't as closely tied to the infrastructure of the council or the organization that they're part of. So those I think kind of fall under the category of the complications to this yet to be worked out, but I would also say within the realm of technical possibility. There's nothing about national infrastructure that shouldn't allow individual councils to interact appropriately with the automation environment.
Could I just add a note about the New Zealand context for that? Because I think we're ready to do that. Like we have the technology, we've got the APIs, we want to use web services, APIs where possible, but the council systems aren't ready. And that's our issue right now. We've had requests from councils to do stuff, but so even big systems like councils who have SAP, they haven't necessarily bought all the bits, and probably won't because of the charging models that some of those companies use. So it's not just us; it's a two-way street.
Yeah, and the same thing happens in the university environment. A lot of these next generation library management systems that academic libraries are thinking about, the libraries are saying we've got to have all these APIs to be able to better manage authentication and business, financial transactions. But then the university system, it'll be a year or so before they have that ready yet. So a lot of kind of batch files being exchanged in the meantime. Anyone else? Okay.
All the other questions will be answered at Marshall's session this afternoon.
All right. They're setting them up. I'd just like to thank you very much, Marshall, for agreeing to come along and talk to Kōtui library managers and Kōtui board and anybody else interested in Kōtui. It's a great opportunity. Good to hear about how things are operating in the US. and it kind of validates the direction that we're going with Kōtui. So I'd just like to thank you very much and ask everyone to join with me